the Xiao Gui picture in which they're more hidden has been lost. Okay, here is still another copy. The next, please. Yes, this one's attributed to still another artist, Xiao Zhao, who was a follower of Li Tong. At any rate, all wrong attributions, of course. This one, I think, was in the collection of C.Z. Wang. It doesn't matter anyway, old collection. And here, there's the things that went wrong have gone more wrong. The big central mass has been diminished and flattened, and these two projecting pieces at the sides are like pointing fingers, pointing upward, quite unnatural and unimpressive. And again, the temple and the covered bridge and the houses, or the inn down below, all that has been much enlarged and made more prominent. In other words, the sort of narrative elements of the picture have been enlarged by this artist, so the whole thing has been, all the subtlety has been lost. Okay, enough of that. That's pretty obvious, but I wanted to use it again to make these points. Okay, here we are with a hand scroll in the Musée Czerniewski in Paris. I talked about it at some length, and we talked about Tang Dynasty figure painting, and I introduced it as a fake, a forgery by the great modern forger Zhang Daqian, died in 1983. It is very loosely attributed to Han Gan, an inscription that follows it. I think I mentioned this when I talked about it. And he is supposed to have founded at Dunhuang, so goes the story, Zhang Daqian, that is. But actually he made it himself. Now, it represents, you see, 4 horses and 2 grooms, one of them with a red cap hidden behind 2 of the horses, a little bit to the right of the main figure at the end. And as I said, I used to put this on the screen after showing a lot of Tang paintings and talking about Tang painting, and really good students would be able to say, no, that can't be a Tang painting, it doesn't work. But on the other hand, the Czerniewski painting, before they bought it, great authorities were consulted to be sure that they were right in spending all this money. And I won't name them all, but there were major authorities of the time, including my teacher, Max Lohr. And they all said, yes, fine, great work, early work by it. Now, okay, why? One thing, I mean, it's not that my students are smarter than the great authorities, I'm not making that claim, but all the people can be trained to look in certain ways. Another thing to say is that often the original work impresses people more than a copy, or than a photograph or a reproduction. Often it's when you get home and look at photographs that you realize something you saw wasn't really all that good, or was better than you thought, or whatever. Why this is true, I won't argue, but I've found it to be true over many years. Anyway, this is very impressive in the original, but not so impressive when you simply put it up like this on the screen. Here is the horses. As you see, they are repetitive. They are very flat. They don't occupy space in the way they should. The colors are a little bit over. Well, I won't try to be too simplistic here. But here's the later part of it. But the point I want to make is that the groom behind with the red cap doesn't occupy any space. He isn't given any space. He's just kind of a flat image drawn back there. Here's a detail, by the way, of the close-up of the head of the main groom and the horse. A lot of elaborate aging, tearing of the silk and spattering and so forth has been done by probably maybe a mounter in Japan, at any rate, to make it look old. I'll speak later about this matter of how the analysis of the silk can be helpful, but can be deceptive. Now, next, please. Here is Zhang Daqian, my good friend, and his daughter Sheng, who is my student, as I've said. This is in his later years, but he's the one I think who really did this. He was quite wonderful as a forger, quite brilliant. I mean, I admired him while being, like everybody, kind of fooled sometimes by his paintings. Now, the point I want to make, I bring in here some paintings by the Dutch forger Han van Meegeren, I guess it is, the recent Dutch forger. This is his Supper at Emmaus. He forged paintings by Vermeer and other Dutch masters, but notably Vermeer. Everybody wanted more Vermeers, and there weren't any more, so he made them. Anyway, Vermeer, he reconstructed a period in which Vermeer might have gone to Italy and been affected by the works of Caravaggio. That's all a complicated story. And he filled in what the people, what the experts wanted to see, so to speak. This best picture, here seen in color, Supper at Emmaus, works pretty well. The three main figures around the table occupy space and so forth. And the figure behind the woman looking over the shoulder of Christ is not so bad. But in others of his lesser paintings, the figures are simply jammed together in a really unacceptable way for a 17th century painting. They don't occupy any space. Another matter, of course, is the faces have this kind of sentimental spirituality, which once you see it, you can't escape. That was a great fault in von Meheren's own painting. Part of the reasons he was never accepted as a major artist on his own, which is why he tried to get his revenge by fooling everybody. But there's, as I say, kind of sickly, sentimental faces. But look at the figures in the upper left here, all jammed together flat. Or here, Christ teaching. The figures, for instance, the figure to the direct right of Christ, looking up at him and seen in profile, has no space at all. It's a flat figure. And the figure above him, that is not a rough, but on the upper right, really sort of, anyway, reaches around in front of Christ, in front of the chair in a way, and you can see his hand, in a way that doesn't make any sense spatially. In other words, the paintings don't work spatially. The same is true, I would argue, for Zhang Dachen's forgeries. And this can often be a criterion for detecting forgeries. Now here I'll show you, I want to bring in here, my colleague Wen Fong published in 1962 a very good article called The Problem of Forgeries in Chinese Painting, published in Artibus Asiae for 1962. I'll have a reference in my handout. And he discusses this painting, which I'll put on here. This is copied from Wen Fong's reproduction, and here in color, the upper part of the painting, taken also from a reproduction. I don't have original slides. This was a painting of a bodhisattva, supposed to have come from Dunhuang, and it had a date on it, and it was very impressive. Bodhisattva holding a glass with flowers in it, and flowers falling all around. There's a dated inscription on it, and a donor, etc. Very impressive. I saw it in Japan in a dealer's hands, and I was so taken with it that I wanted to go back and persuade the Freer Gallery to buy it. By the time I got back to the Freer, I had begun to recognize Zhang Dachen's forgeries and was less enthusiastic. But anyway, Wen Fong made the right argument, showing that it was taken actually from a wall painting at Dunhuang, which you see on the right in his reproduction here. And he also analyzed very properly and very skillfully the drawing of things like hands, how the Tang artist is able to draw a hand organically, believably, whereas Zhang Dachen, somehow good artist as he was, gets it wrong and doesn't really make a hand that has any organic credibility, so to speak. Okay, but Wen Fong also makes the argument in his article, or not, he doesn't make the argument, he has a long footnote showing how this painting, the one that now is recognized as a fake by Zhang Dachen, went through analysis in a technical laboratory in Kyoto and came out absolutely with flying colors. They were going to publish an article on this as an example of Tang Dynasty silk. Nothing could be found wrong with it. So I'm saying his conclusion then was that one had to use art historical criteria because technical analysis doesn't always work. Sometimes it does. The point is that technical analysis, like bad pigments that are wrong or whatever, can often prove work to be inauthentic. It's wrong. But almost never can prove conclusively that it's authentic. For that, you need lots of other kinds of arguments. Okay, enough of that. I should say, by the way, that I've been all the way through this series avoiding talking about the best known, the most discussed case of a highly problematic dating and attribution in recent times. That is, a painting that was bought for a major museum which purports to be about a great early master. I think many of you know what I'm talking about, but which I firmly believe to be a modern fabrication by Zhang Chen. And I would only say that if my colleagues recognized and respected the methods I've been outlining here, the controversy, I think, would be ended. The painting would immediately be recognized as the recent forgery, as I think it is. Okay, that's my opinion. Others don't feel that way. At any rate, I'm not really talking about that. I keep referring to it without talking about it. Okay, next. Now we have Fan Quan, the great Fan Quan painting, and another one beside it, the one titled Sitting Alone by the Stream, which is a work I would take to be a work by a later follower of Fan Quan. And I use these to show how features of style that begin as representationally effective within a visually descriptive system turn into non-descriptive conventions, something that the artist has learned instead of derived from study of nature and from a long natural process of working out his own style in a Gombrickian way by comparison and comparing and correcting. Anyway, so these the points of style that belong to the school manner are going to work against realism, and the one, in other words, is going to be readable much more successfully as an image of nature and as something you can understand as that, whereas the other takes its place eventually, if you read it right, as a kind of fabrication made up of, things the artist has learned as schoolworks. Here are the details. Such things as, for instance, the outlining of the landscape masses here, the way the things are have little projections and breaks and so forth. Now that has some naturalistic references. I don't say exactly what they are, but if you made a lot of photographs of the edges of rock masses in China, you would find formations like this, and you would understand what Fan Quan was representing, what he had in mind. Whereas in the copy here on the other side, the artist simply sort of does a whole series of little jerks of the brush, pong, 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 imitating what he has learned as how to do outlines in the Fan Quan manner. Or you see here in the upper center a kind of stepped down, left, down, zigzag kind of form. That continues in Fan Quan and Li Tong style things. Okay, let me give just to show you again that you have to keep bringing in other factors to keep the priority straight. Let me give another example that seems to go the other way. Here on the left now is a section of the hand scroll painting by Zhao Lingrong, dated 1100 in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, titled River Landscape with Willows and Cottages, showing the cottages among the trees and fog drifting through the trees and so forth, all the elements of the Zhao Lingrong style in these rather childishly drawn houses, if you will. And then, beside it, painting an album leaf, now in the Cleveland Museum, by Liang Zhong, who is, as I said, mainly a flower and bird painter, but in this case painted a landscape with houses. And Zhao Lingrong's painting, as I say, is dated 1100. Liang Zhong's is dated 1117. But the difference here is that Liang Zhong is a trained professional academy master, and he manages to give much more convincing space to the picture. The terrain, the earth goes back. The earth's surface goes back much more convincingly into space. The trees are more believable. The fog is not as... in other words, what in Zhao Lingrong are the kind of conventional elements of an amateur style, or Liang Zhong turns back into more representational features of a picture. So this certainly doesn't mean that the Liang